everyone. Welcome to interCHANGE. I'm Dan Jones. Interesting things to talk about today. Jeb Bush gets into the race for president. You have to wonder how this will affect the chances of our own Governor, Scott Walker. We'll talk about the reports that Russ Feingold's PAC raised millions of dollars, but spent most of it on Feingold himself and his friends. And we'll talk about the woman in Spokane who was one of the leading and most respected members of the black community there. Turns out she isn't black. Let me introduce everybody. Of course, you know Joel McNally, longtime newspaper columnist, and Kevin Fischer, who spent many years as a broadcast journalist in town, as did Denise Callaway, now a communications and public relations professional. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show to talk about the tragic shootings in South Carolina. All right, let's talk first about Jeb Bush getting into the race for the Republican nomination for president. You really have to wonder, with his name recognition, his family history, all that big fundraising machine, if he automatically becomes the front runner and pushes everybody else right from the start to the side of the road, including Scott Walker, Kevin.
Well, he has managed to be at the top of the polls or at least in second place. And he has the name recognition, of course, and an ability to raise a ton of money, and he already has a lot of that. He is qualified. I think he'd be a good president. He would get my support if he got the nomination. But having said all of that, count me as one of the many conservatives who's not thrilled at Jeb Bush getting into the race. He's got some real problems. I think the biggest is that there is legitimate Bush fatigue in this country. Even his own mother says that America doesn't need another Bush in the White House. He has not endeared himself to the conservative base. He's done everything to try to distance himself from the red meat eaters, which you will need in these series of primaries, which are going to have over a dozen at least Republican candidates. So I think he's got to move more to the right than he's been so far. And yes, I said there's some Bush fatigue. He's in a real tough position because he will have to distance himself from his family, and that's going to be very, very hard given the closeness of the entire Bush family. I say that there are the Republicans have bench strength. They have plenty of new, exciting, refreshing, young candidates, and I don't think that as a whole, and it's very early, but we get closer to the election next year, I don't think America wants another retread, and that includes on the Democratic side. We have Bush fatigue, we have Clinton fatigue, and I'm not so sure that as we get closer to November, or for the fall of 2016, that Jeb Bush is going to have the nomination in hand. I find it very interesting that he put a logo out this week when he made his announcement that he's finally running, and the Bush name isn't there. It's just Jeb. That was very telling to me.
Denise, if it came down to it, could Jeb Bush beat Hillary Clinton?
I think it would be an interesting race. You know, there's a reason that we have these elections because a lot of things can happen between the time someone announces that they're running for president and we actually have the election. I think Jeb Bush is a very interesting candidate. I think Kevin's right. He doesn't appeal to those people on the far right, but he's a good candidate for Republicans because he still is conservative, though some people may feel he's not conservative enough. But he also is more middle of the road on some issues, particularly when you take a look at immigration. It was interesting that when he made his announcement, he also spoke in Spanish. He gets it. He knows that if the Republican Party is going to be competitive, it has to be able to appeal beyond its traditional Caucasian, mostly male base. So he's positioning himself, I think, not so much to run for the Republican nomination. He's positioning himself to run for president. One of the things that we've seen that Republicans have really struggled with, whether it's been in a national election or a state election, is you have to really play to the red meat crowd, I think, as Kevin has said in the past. So you play to that crowd, but it's so far to the right, you can't shift back enough to be able to appeal to more moderate voters, both more moderate Republicans and independents, perhaps even some moderate Democrats. You can't make that shift back, and it really cripples candidates who go that far right because they can't, in a general election, pick up enough middle-of-the-road support that they have to
His
do.
entire-
And I think Jeb Bush is being very smart about this.
He's very, very political this week. That was some strategy. He was not appealing to the red meat eaters. He was appealing to Americans in general. And see, I think that might help you in the fall of 2016, but you have to get to the fall of 2016.
Understood.
And that might hurt you in the primaries.
And it's calculated because he's doing that now, and it may harm him coming out as strongly as he could, perhaps as the Republican candidate, but he's also not crippling himself with mainstream Americans if he is, in fact, the nominee.
But it's also fair to say that there can't be any family in America, any political machine in America that knows how to win a presidential nomination like the Bush machine.
Boy, the last Bush president we had so trashed the name, that Kevin's right. Jeb's got a lot to overcome. I think he'll go down in history as one of the worst presidents we've ever had. And this is supposed to be the bright guy. And I have to say, boy, he is not a very good campaigner. He is deadly dull. He is, when you ask him, knowing what we all know now, that there were no weapons of mass destruction, would you still invade Iraq? And it took him a week to figure out the answer, which is that nobody in their right mind would. But he didn't know that immediately. I think his real strength, Denise pointed out, is with Latinos. He's married to a Latina. He speaks fluent Spanish. He says he speaks Spanish more at home than he speaks English. And boy, does the Republican Party have to stop with the hate rhetoric towards immigration. And every other candidate in the Republican primary, except perhaps Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz, who, I guess he's Latino, although he was born in Canada, and no one's ever said anything about, boy, where's his birth certificate? But Jeb is just, he hasn't run for office since 2002. And he is really a bad campaigner at this point. I assume he has enough money to put good people around him to teach him again how to run for office. But boy, he's not going to be a real impressive candidate. At the same time, he is on the right track. Republicans need to stop with the racist hate, with the anti-immigration, with alienating every woman. There's not a Republican woman in the Wisconsin legislature who will support the right of women to their own health care. And you have to get away from those hate issues, that what Kevin called red meat, to appeal in a national election. And Jeb at least knows that. He's just not very good at it right now.
Could Jeb beat Walker in Iowa?
I don't know about Iowa, because Iowa's a weird state. Iowa shouldn't be the first primary or caucus, because it is so extreme. The issues that are there are not the issues of America. And several of the early states are just terrible states to have a big say in who's going to win the Republican nomination, because you have to be so ugly to win in those states. And evangelicals, boy, Scott Walker, let's just compare Scott Walker and Jeb Bush. Scott Walker not only opposes illegal immigration, he opposes legal immigration for Latinos. Is that a very intelligent position to take in a national election where the fastest growing minority in this country is Latinos? No, it's not. And the Republicans cannot continue trashing immigration and refusing to give a legitimate citizenship to
if I
people
can
in this
respond to
country.
that, being the only Republican here tonight on the panel, we're not trashing legal immigration.
Scott Walker is.
We want to do something
Scott
about
Walker is
illegal
opposing legal immigration.
because we have too many illegal immigrants in our country right now who are taking jobs, who are sucking up social services, and a lot of them are committing crimes. So
are you going to call them rapists like Donald Trump?
Something's got to be done about that.
You cannot say, Kevin, that a lot of illegal immigrants
The numbers are there.
crime. The numbers are not there. It's not true. And the reality of it is, if we were to say, and Republicans have admitted this, that if you were to suddenly say, if you are not in this country legally, you have to leave this country, it would cause a massive problem for our economy. There has to be a thoughtful way to go about solving the country's immigration problem that recognizes recognizes people who are here and does not penalize them for being here, because quite frankly, they have contributed to our economy. They have contributed to our community. Jeb Bush is smart enough to get that, and I would say that's one thing that he has going for him that the other Republicans that have announced so far, who knows who else is going to show up, have not been able to articulate, and that will serve him well as people, quite frankly, I think Republicans do have to look at who are they likely to have as their best candidate to win in the general election, because you don't want to win the ideological war and end up losing the presidency. And if you don't go with someone who isn't able to be more middle of the road, that's exactly what's going to happen.
Well, you can't be middle of the road on immigration reform, and the first thing you have to do when it comes to immigration reform is to secure and control the borders, which we haven't done for 30 or 40 years. And I don't see any Democrat candidate doing anything in that regard.
All right, let's talk for just a few minutes about Russ Feingold, who is now again running for the Senate seat he lost a few years ago to Ron Johnson. After Feingold left office, he set up a political action committee with the hopes of raising millions of dollars for progressive candidates. Well, it did raise millions of dollars, but according to reporting by the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel this week, only 5% of the money went to political candidates or political parties. Most of it went for salaries, consulting fees, and perks for Feingold and his former staffers. This doesn't reflect too well on Mr. Campaign finance reform.
I don't think it reflects terribly badly because all the fundraising, illegal fundraising on the Republican side, you know, they do not have an issue against Feingold on fundraising. Dan Bice, I respect Dan Bice as a journalist. I don't think he's an ideological columnist. He's a gossip columnist, but he's not an ideological columnist. But he allows himself to be used by either side, either the Republicans that want to trash the Democrats or the Democrats that want to trash the Republicans. And in this case, there was absolutely nothing there.
So Dan Bice is the villain in this?
No, Dan Bice is being used by the Republicans who fed him this non-story.
That's not true.
That is absolutely true because, you know, these fundraising PACs all over this country for candidates.
Everybody does it, so he's okay.
No, it's not everybody does it. What I'm saying is, in fact, Republicans are doing criminal things with their PACs, and we're saying that, oh, he paid the staff or he paid for fundraising by a fundraising group? I mean, that's really kind of an amazing revelation.
Does he get a free ride?
Well, he shouldn't. I mean, this is hypocrisy with a capital H. And I worked in politics. When you're a donor, when you give money to a PAC, you don't expect it to be going to the candidate or his cronies. Now, this was the hallmark of his entire political career. He was arrogant about it, suggested that anyone who bathed themselves in campaign cash was somehow evil or corrupt. And he maintained this holier-than-thou attitude throughout his entire political career. And now we hear that he's benefiting. He's benefiting from this misuse, this abuse of campaign finance. Now, the average American doesn't understand the various nuances of the campaign finance laws, and that would include yours truly, all right? But the average American gets this, that they want a politician who's honest, and they want a politician who has integrity. And they view that far more important than any policy like campaign finance reform. So that hurts him in what is going to be a very close and very dirty race. I mean, you're going to see plenty of ads about what a hypocrite that this man is.
So, Denise, if I drop a check for $200 in the mail to Progressives United, do I expect that's going to go to Russ Feingold and Russ Feingold's former staffers?
Well, I think when people contribute to political campaigns, as I'd be willing to bet all of us on this panel have done, you expect that that money is going to be going to support that campaign. Now, that can be a variety of different things, or you give it to a political action committee. I don't expect that every dollar that I would give to a political action committee is going to go towards supporting candidates. Who in the world do you think is going to run the office to make sure that dollars begin to go where they need to go? Who's going to be able to do of the fundraising. I mean, it's not like people have a telethon and you have people answering the dang telephone to be able to raise money.
But
Most
of this money went, not just a small percentage.
Kevin. Excuse me, Kevin, you had your time. What happened is this is the way these PACs run. This is the way they operate. Oh, it most certainly is true.
No,
yes,
not where the vast percentage, the vast majority of the money goes into the candidate's pockets or the pockets of his friends.
Pockets or the pocket of his friends.
That's not how it works.
And
I dare say that if we were talking about Ron Johnson doing this, you would be crucifying him.
I am not finished. Thank you.
This is a dialogue program.
Well, except when you get on your soapbox and you go on. Your monologue.
You've got the odds tonight, but go ahead.
Well, I have the odds, but you certainly have the voice, so go right ahead.
Defend the hypocrite.
It's not defending a hypocrite. It is the way the system works. And the problem is not Russ Feingold. The problem is the way that we have set up these PACs and allowed them to operate. That is the issue. But Kevin, don't sit up here and say he put money in his pocket and gave it to his friends like they all went down to Macy's and bought suits. Well, that's not what happened with the money. I think that, and I would say that hearing Kevin talk about this really tells me that Republicans in this state are searching, scrambling for something to be able to pin on Russ Feingold, because the polls clearly show that he can beat Ron Johnson and beat him handily. So I'm not surprised that at this point in time, the dirt starts flying, and it starts flying from Republicans.
It's not dirt. It's Dan Bice reporting that $317,000 went into the pocket of one of his high staffers.
It is dirt, Kevin. It's dirt, and you know it is.
Okay, but apparently, if a Democrat violates campaign finance reform laws, it's okay. It's okay.
Let's take one big step back.
I was not finished.
Don't say it was dirty. Don't say it was dirty.
I don't call it clean.
Don't assume that it was illegal, because there's been nothing that's indicated that any kind of campaign finance laws have been violated.
All right, we move on.
At all.
We move on.
Go ahead, Dan.
We have to talk for a few minutes.
When are you the moderator?
We have to talk for a few minutes about this woman who was in charge of the NAACP in Spokane, Washington. Her estranged parents drop a bomb the other day when they say she might like to play black, but she doesn't have a drop of black blood in her body. And here's a picture of her as a blonde-haired little girl. So she ends up resigning her position and goes on national TV, not to admit that she's a fraud, but to criticize people for how she's been treated since the story broke. We'll go to Denise Callaway, who we think is a black woman. I
am, and proud to be one.
Do you think she did anything wrong?
Well, you know, here's what I think happened. Or this is the way I look at it. I am very proud and, quite frankly, feel very fortunate to be an African-American woman. I have a portrait of my great-great-grandmother that hangs in my house, and I look at that every day, and I think about what she endured and what she overcame, and my grandmothers and my aunts and my mother and my friends, where you take a look at this country overcoming racism and sexism. So I'm very proud of being an African-American woman, and I'm very proud of what African-American women have accomplished. This is a woman who identified with African-American causes, and she's white, and that's fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. When we take a look at many of the causes and concerns that impact African-Americans, they impact people across this country. And the more we start to talk about the ways in which we can work together to address those issues, the better off we are. She made a big mistake pretending to be something that she wasn't. And she didn't have to do that to support something that was important to her. I mean, it really is that simple. It was a big mistake. Spray tan and a good wig does not make you an African-American woman. And her concern and her beliefs about African-American causes are not something that she had to pretend to be African-American to support.
Okay, she lied, but did she hurt anybody? She wasn't saying she was a doctor and operating. She lied. Did she hurt anybody, though?
Well, I think, she hurt herself, and she hurt the cause. She did more harm to the cause, I believe, than help it. And you really don't have to analyze this in great detail. She lied, she was a fraud, and she continues the lie, and she obviously has some deep-rooted psychological issues. And you can use all the psycho mumbo-jumbo to defend what she did. It's really, as you said, it's that simple. She's not black. If she's black, well, then I'm LeBron James. You know, she said she was something that she's not, and she continues to try to defraud the American public. And I think what she is now is she is the latest form of playing the victim card. She wanted to feel oppressed, and she wanted to feel like she was downtrodden and you know, the victim. She wants America to believe that somehow she's a victim, and I think most Americans aren't going to fall for that malarkey.
Would you be just as shocked if somebody said, okay, I'm in charge of this gay organization, but I'm not gay? Does she have to be black to be in charge of a local black organization?
No, of course not. But let me add one more thing, which I'm surprised has not come up in any of the conversation I've heard about this case. The Human Genome Project in the 90s, science mapped out all the genes in the human body and found that race was not a genetic trait. There is no gene in one race that doesn't exist in the other races. We are basically all part of the human race, just like we like to believe we are. When I was growing up in this country, it was interesting you use the drop of blood thing in your opening. One drop of black blood was considered what made someone black. And of course, blood didn't come that way. And blood wasn't black or red or white. Blood was red. But some people were terrified about getting transfusions or getting blood from a black person if you happen to be a white person. And the truth of the matter is,
I was being figurative.
Race is a social construct. I'm not going to argue race doesn't exist in America. It certainly does, and racism certainly does. But it is a social construct. It is what we say it is. And oddly enough, so there were the racist southern states during Jim Crow that would define race according to the number of ancestors you had. And you could actually, if you went across a state line, you could be white in one state and black in another state. The definitions were just that screwy and just that ridiculous. There's one thing that this woman said, which is absolutely true. We all came from Africa. We know that civilization started in the part of the world that became Africa. And as a matter of fact, this woman's parents, who don't like her very much, even though they raised her among 4 adopted black siblings, those parents aren't correct that there is no black blood there. You know, the truth of the matter is, you know, the races have been mixed up enough. You know, there's a very interesting novel that just was featured in the New York Times called Loving Day. It's about biracial people in this country. And the question is, are biracial people black or not? Well, they are if they will say they are. Barack Obama had a white mother and a black father, and no one disputes that he wants to be considered a black man. And there are a whole bunch of people who hate him because they consider him a black man. But it is a social definition. It is not a genetic one.
I just wish that she's masquerading herself as this crusader for the black cause and all the work she's done. Well, fine.
There are lots of whites who believe in the black cause.
And that's terrific, and there should be. I just wish that, you know, having been in the media as long as I have, that the media would not obsess on her. She doesn't deserve all this attention. How about spending some attention on black and white, those who are really out there working hard and are sincere about their efforts?
Well, if the story out of Spokane seemed kind of bizarre, the news from Charleston, South Carolina this week was nothing short of tragic. Another mass killing, this time inside an historic black church. Rick Horowitz has some thoughts and some uncomfortable questions. Rick.
Susie Jackson, Myra Thompson, Daniel Simmons, DePayne Middleton Doctor, Tywanza Sanders, Ethel Lance, Sharonda Coleman Singleton, Cynthia Hurd, Clemente Pinckney. The youngest was 26, the oldest was 87. They were in church, at study, at prayer, and now they're gone. There are days when I'm relatively optimistic about the human condition. This isn't one of those days. What I feel today is sadness, deep, deep sadness, overwhelming frustration, anger verging on rage. I feel hatred for the haters. Newsflash for the Charleston killer, you with the white power patches on your jacket in that suddenly famous photograph. If white folks still ruled South Africa and Rhodesia, you'd be a loser anyhow. Your own sorry-ass life wouldn't be one dot better because people with a skin tone like yours were running everything in some country far away, or even here at home. Why would you possibly think otherwise? But now you've got a gun and lots of bullets, and the trusting welcome of people who've done you absolutely no harm. You'll slaughter them anyway because they look different from you, and that'll make everything right, right? And I wonder, are we hardwired to hate? Is there some part of our prehistoric brain that still sorts the world into same and different, into safe and scary? This time it's skin tone, but when it isn't skin tone, it's religion or language, and even sameness can't always calm us. Within one religion, different practices, so centuries of bloodshed. Within one language, different accents, so decades of discrimination and disdain. And if we all had the same skin tone and the same religion, the same practices and accents, would we simply find other, even tinier distinctions? Would we sort ourselves out by hair color, by height, by the length of our stride, or the shape of our ears? Are we so focused on seeing the differences that we ignore the commonalities? And are we doomed to be this way down to the last generation? Are we hardwired to hate?
Thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Have a wonderful Father's Day.